I never thought my life would take such a twist, especially at a time when I believed things had settled into a comfortable routine. My husband, Richard, and I had moved to this quiet town a few years ago, hoping for a peaceful escape from the bustle of the city. Our neighbor, Samuel, a spry 72-year-old man with a gentle smile and a slow, steady way of speaking, had always been kind to us. But I never anticipated the day he'd asked me to visit his farm for something that would change everything. It was an unusually warm autumn afternoon, and the sun cast a golden light across Samuel's fields. I'd been restless that day, unable to focus on my usual tasks, so when Samuel called out from his yard, asking if I'd like to come over to help him with a small project, I agreed without much thought. Richard was away on a business trip, and the house felt strangely empty. Samuel's farm was just down the road, a sprawling piece of land dotted with old oaks and surrounded by rows of weathered wooden fences. As I walked up, I could see Samuel leaning against the gate, his face breaking into a warm smile when he saw me approach. He looked like he always did, broad-shouldered and strong for his age, with a kind, knowing glint in his eyes that made it easy to trust him. "Thank you for coming, Emma," he said, his voice low and calming. "I know it's last minute, but I thought you might enjoy some time out here. There's something about the air on the farm that clears the mind." I smiled, feeling oddly comforted by his words. "I was glad to get out, actually. It's been a bit lonely at home." He gave a small nod, as if understanding entirely, and gestured toward the barn. "Follow me, then. I've got something special I wanted to show you." The barn was a quiet, earthy place filled with the comforting smell of hay and wood. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the wooden walls, casting soft beams across the dusty air. Samuel led me toward a corner where an old workbench stood, covered with tools and small artifacts from his years on the farm. His movements were slow, deliberate, as he picked up a small, weathered box from the bench and turned to me. "This belonged to my late wife," he said softly, opening the box to reveal a collection of delicate trinkets. There was something bittersweet in his expression as he looked down at the contents, and I could feel the weight of his memories settling in the air around us. "It's beautiful," I murmured, touched by the tenderness in his voice. He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "She had a way of finding beauty in the simplest things. It's funny. No matter how many years pass, certain memories still feel as fresh as yesterday." We stood there in comfortable silence, and I felt a strange sense of intimacy settle between us, a connection that was difficult to explain. His presence was calming, grounding, and I found myself captivated by the quiet strength in his gaze, the way he seemed to carry decades of life stories within him. I was about to say something when Samuel reached out and gently placed a hand on my shoulder, his touch warm and steady. It was a simple gesture, yet something in the way his fingers lingered, the slight pressure of his hand, sent a soft ripple of warmth through me. I looked up, meeting his gaze, and for a moment, it was as if time stood still. "Emma," he began, his voice almost a whisper, "thank you for being here today. It means more to me than you know." His words stirred something deep inside me, an unexpected feeling that I couldn't quite put into words. We were standing so close, and I could feel the subtle tension in the air, a quiet, unspoken longing that neither of us seemed willing to break. I wasn't sure what was happening between us, only that it felt different, like we had crossed some invisible line that had always been there, unseen until now. "Of course, Samuel," I replied, my voice soft, almost trembling. "I'm glad I could be here." He held my gaze for a moment longer, his eyes filled with a warmth that felt both familiar and new, like something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Slowly he leaned forward, just enough that I could feel his breath on my cheek, and my heart began to race, pounding louder with each passing second. I stood there, rooted in place, caught between 1,000 swirling thoughts and the simplicity of Samuel's closeness. His gaze, tender yet searching, lingered on my face, and I felt my breath hitch as he gently brushed a stray hair from my cheek. His fingers were warm and roughened from years of work, yet the touch was surprisingly gentle, sending a shiver through me that I couldn't ignore. "Sometimes," he murmured, his voice soft as the autumn breeze, It feels like life gives you second chances in the strangest ways. I wasn't sure if he was speaking to himself or to me, but the words resonated, stirring feelings I hadn't expected. I hadn't realized how empty things had felt lately, how much I had started to feel like a ghost in my own life. And here was Samuel, reminding me in the simplest way that connection, true, human connection, could reignite something buried deep inside. "I think I understand," I replied, my voice barely more than a whisper. His gaze softened, and for a moment, he looked almost vulnerable. "It's a rare thing," he said, "finding someone who understands without words." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I'd experienced in a long time. We stood there, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from each other. I could feel the anticipation building, a quiet yet undeniable pull that seemed to have a life of its own. There was a brief moment when I thought I should step back, put some distance between us, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Samuel's hand drifted down from my shoulder to my arm, his fingers brushing over my skin with a softness that surprised me. His touch lingered, tentative yet filled with an unspoken intensity, and I felt my heart beat faster as his hand finally found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a way that felt both natural and forbidden. He took a step closer, closing the small distance between us, and I could feel the warmth of his body, the solidness of him. My mind raced with all the reasons this was wrong, but none of them could overpower the way he made me feel in that moment, seen, understood, and cherished in a way I hadn't felt in years. "Emma," he whispered, his breath warm against my skin. "Are you comfortable here with me?" The question, simple as it was, held layers of meaning, and I found myself nodding, words escaping me. "Yes," I murmured, my voice barely audible. "I am." He nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, and in that moment, I felt my resolve melt away. He leaned down, slowly, as if giving me every chance to pull back, to break the spell. But I didn't. Instead, I let myself sink into the moment, letting the world outside fade until it was just the two of us. His lips brushed against mine, softly at first, almost tentative. It was the kind of kiss that spoke volumes without words, gentle yet filled with a restrained passion that took my breath away. I felt my hand reach up, resting against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my palm. He deepened the kiss, his arms wrapping around me, pulling me closer in a way that felt both comforting and electrifying. For the first time in years, I let myself go, surrendering to the warmth and the quiet intensity of the moment. His touch was firm yet tender, his hands tracing a path down my back as he held me. I felt an overwhelming sense of release, as if years of tension, loneliness, and unspoken desires had finally found an outlet. We stood there, wrapped in each other, our breaths mingling, our heartbeats sinking as the world around us fell away. Every lingering touch, every quiet sigh, seemed to heighten the intensity between us, making the moment feel timeless and profound. Samuel's fingers traced gentle circles along my back, his touch both reassuring and thrilling, grounding me even as it sent waves of warmth through my body. I pulled back slightly, looking up into his eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation, any indication that this was a mistake. But all I found was a steady, unwavering gaze filled with tenderness and something deeper, something that made my heart race. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He gave a slight nod, his hand gently cupping my face. "I've never been more certain," he replied, his voice steady, warm. And in that moment, I believed him. I let my guard down completely, giving in to the feeling of being held, of being wanted. As the moments stretched on, I felt a quiet resolve settle within me, an acceptance of the connection we shared, as complicated and unexpected as it was. We moved as one, each touch deepening the bond between us, each kiss filled with an intensity that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. His hands roamed down my arms, up my back, exploring with a reverence that made my heart ache with longing. In the quiet of the barn, surrounded by the scent of hay and the warmth of his presence, we crossed an invisible line that couldn't be undone. The connection between us had become something undeniable, something that neither of us could ignore or take back. And yet, in that moment, it felt right, as if we had both been waiting a lifetime for this single, unforgettable embrace. We stayed there, wrapped in each other's warmth, allowing the intensity of the moment to wash over us. The barn was filled with the soft, golden light of the setting sun, casting long shadows that danced across the walls and floor. It felt as though time had slowed, stretching each second into something infinite and profound. Samuel held me close, his arms firm and steady, and I found myself melting into his embrace, feeling a sense of peace and belonging that I hadn't realized I was searching for. After a while, he pulled back slightly, his gaze steady as he looked down at me, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "Emma," he said softly, his voice almost reverent, "I never imagined this would happen. But being here with you, it feels like the most natural thing in the world." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "I know," I whispered, barely able to find my voice. "I never expected this either, but it feels right. Like it was meant to be." He smiled, a soft, almost bittersweet smile, as if he understood the weight of my words. Gently, he brushed his thumb along my cheek, his touch sending a wave of warmth through me. "Sometimes," he murmured, "life has a way of bringing you exactly what you need, even if you don't realize it at first." There was a depth in his gaze that left me breathless, a look that spoke of years of experience, of heartbreak, of longing. I felt as if I were seeing him truly for the first time, not just as my neighbor but as a man who had lived a full life, who had loved and lost, and who was offering me a part of himself that he had kept hidden away. As we stood there, our fingers intertwined, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. In Samuel's arms, I felt cherished, seen, and understood in a way that transcended words. Every touch, every look, every quiet breath we shared felt like a silent promise, a vow that we would carry this moment with us, no matter what the future held. Without another word, he led me toward the old wooden ladder that climbed up to the loft. His hand was warm and steady as he helped me up, and I could feel the strength and reassurance in his grip. The loft was small and cozy, filled with the scent of hay and memories of years past. We settled down on a soft pile of hay, surrounded by beams of fading sunlight filtering through the wooden slats. For a while, we just sat there in silence, our hands still entwined, our bodies close but not quite touching. The tension in the air had shifted, becoming something softer, more intimate. I felt a quiet thrill at the nearness of him, at the way his hand lingered on mine, as if savoring the feel of my skin. He turned to me, his gaze tender and filled with a vulnerability that made my heart ache. "Emma," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I want you to know that whatever this is between us, it's real. I don't know where it will lead, but I know that I wouldn't trade this moment for anything." I reached up, brushing a strand of hair away from his face, feeling a surge of affection that I couldn't hold back. "I feel the same," I replied softly. "I don't want to look too far ahead. I just want to be here, with you, right now." He leaned in, his lips finding mine in a kiss that was slow, deep, and filled with all the words we hadn't spoken. It was a kiss that seemed to bridge the years between us, dissolving any doubts, any fears. I felt his hands drift down to my waist, pulling me closer, and I wrapped my arms around him, feeling the strength and warmth of his body against mine. Our kisses grew deeper, more fervent, and soon, we were lost in each other, letting go of everything but the here and now. His hands moved with a quiet reverence, tracing the curves of my body, his touch gentle yet filled with an unspoken promise. I felt my heart pounding, my breath coming faster as the intensity of the moment built, each touch, each kiss leaving me breathless. We moved as if in a dream, each gesture, each caress heightening the connection between us. It was as though we had been brought together by some invisible force, as if we had both been waiting, unknowingly, for this very moment. The loft was filled with the quiet sounds of our breaths, our whispers, the soft rustling of hay beneath us as we surrendered to the moment. As the night began to fall outside, the world around us faded away, leaving only the warmth of Samuel's arms, the gentle strength of his touch, and the certainty that, whatever happened, this moment would be forever etched in our memories. Finally, as we lay side by side, the last light of day slipping away, he looked over at me, his expression filled with a quiet awe. "Thank you, Emma," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being here, for sharing this with me." I reached out, taking his hand in mine, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over me. "Thank you, Samuel, for showing me, for reminding me what it feels like to truly connect with someone." We stayed there, wrapped in the warmth of each other's presence, as the stars began to emerge in the sky above. The barn was quiet, the world beyond distant, as if we had found our own little sanctuary in each other's arms. The hours passed in a soft, dreamlike haze as we lay side by side, our breaths in sync, the warmth of his presence a comforting constant against the cool night air. I traced gentle circles along his hand, feeling each ridge and line, every sign of his years of hard work and life lived. There was something reassuring in the quiet strength of his grip, as though he were anchoring me to this moment, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. Outside, the sounds of the night settled around us, the quiet rustle of leaves, the occasional chirp of crickets, the distant call of an owl. Inside the loft, there was only us, our shared silence speaking volumes. Every so often, he'd squeeze my hand gently or brush his thumb across my knuckles, small, wordless gestures that felt filled with meaning, as though he were silently reassuring me that this connection was real. Eventually, he pulled me closer, wrapping an arm around me as I rested my head on his shoulder. His heartbeat was steady beneath my cheek, a quiet, rhythmic reminder of the life we shared in this fleeting, precious moment. "I can't remember the last time I felt this content," he murmured, his voice a soft rumble in the stillness. I smiled, my fingers tracing small patterns across his chest. "Me neither. I didn't realize how much I needed this until now." He looked down at me, his gaze warm and tender. "Emma, I never thought I'd find this again, this sense of connection, this feeling of being seen, truly seen. I thought that part of my life was over." The sincerity in his voice made my heart ache with a strange mix of joy and sorrow. It was as if we had both stumbled into something we didn't know we needed, something that had been quietly waiting for us all along. I reached up, touching his cheek, feeling the roughness of his stubble beneath my fingertips. "I know what you mean. Sometimes life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it." He smiled, pressing a soft kiss to my forehead. "Maybe we're both just lucky, then." We lay there in comfortable silence, wrapped up in each other, the minutes ticking by unnoticed. The warmth of his embrace, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the quiet strength in his touch, all of it made me feel safe, cherished, as though I had found a place where I belong. I felt a peace settle over me, a sense of calm that had been missing for so long. After a while, he pulled back slightly, looking into my eyes with a seriousness that made my heart skip a beat. "Emma, I want you to know that whatever this is, whatever it becomes, I'm here. I don't want you to feel like this has to be anything other than what you want it to be." His words were so genuine, so filled with thoughtfulness, that I felt a wave of emotion rise within me. "Thank you, Samuel," I whispered, my voice thick with feeling. "Thank you for giving me this moment, this feeling of being truly cared for." He nodded, his eyes soft and full of understanding. "You deserve it, Emma. More than you know." We lay there, exchanging quiet words, gentle touches, as the night stretched on. Every moment felt precious, as if we were sharing something sacred, something that could only exist between the two of us in this hidden corner of the world. The intimacy between us was deep and profound, the kind of connection that felt both timeless and fleeting, as if we had known each other in 1,000 lifetimes before and had finally found each other again. As dawn began to break, a soft, pale light filled the loft, casting a gentle glow over everything. I could see the faint lines of morning etched across Samuel's face, the small signs of a life lived fully and deeply. His hand was still entwined with mine, his fingers warm and steady, and I felt a pang of longing, knowing that our time together was drawing to an end. He looked at me, a slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "The morning suits you, Emma," he murmured, his voice filled with a quiet affection that made my heart swell. I smiled back, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I could say the same for you, Samuel. We shared one last kiss, slow and tender, savoring the feel of each other one final time. It was a kiss filled with promises, with unspoken words, with the knowledge that this moment, as fleeting as it was, would stay with us forever. When we finally pulled apart, I felt a strange mix of sadness and peace, knowing that what we had shared was special, something that would linger in my heart long after we said goodbye. As we climbed down from the loft, the morning sun casting soft shadows across the barn, I took one last look at Samuel, memorizing the warmth in his gaze, the quiet strength in his posture. He walked me to the gate, his hand resting lightly on my back, a comforting presence that made the goodbye feel less final. "Take care, Emma," he said softly, his voice filled with warmth. "You too, Samuel," I replied, feeling a lump form in my throat. I reached out, giving his hand one last squeeze before turning and walking back toward the road, my heart heavy yet strangely full. As I walked away, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, a quiet joy that seemed to resonate through every step. I knew that our paths had crossed for a reason, that our shared moment was a gift, a reminder that love and connection could bloom even in the most unexpected places.